and welcome to a meeting of the New York State Civil Service Commission. My name is Al Jordan, and I'm coordinator for Civil Service Commission operations. I'm pleased to introduce the members of the State Commission who will preside over our meeting. To my left is Commissioner Caroline Ahl, and to her left is Commissioner Janique Green.
Good morning.
And to my far left is from the Council's office is Jeff Browdy. Also in attendance are Commission staff members who will be introduced as we proceed. Before we begin, we'd like to mention that all the relevant information about the items before the Commission today are on the Department of Civil Service website. Commissioners, this morning we're joined by representatives from the Department of Financial Services, Organization of Management Confidential Employees, and the Public Employees Federation concerning the request from the Department of Financial Services. The Commission has agreed to hear that item, the several items that were introduced to the Commission first. And if it's okay with the Commission, we'll start off by asking everyone at the tables to introduce yourself to the Commissioners.
Please. Terrific. Good morning. Maria Vullo, the Superintendent of DFS. Wonderful to be here.
Chad Loshbach, Director of Administration at DFS.
Heather McCorn, Chief of Staff, DFS.
Joe Santo, Executive Director at OMSI, OPIU Local 153.
Kevin Jones, representing Public Employees Federation, Director of Civil Service Enforcement and Research.
Great. Welcome. Thank you.
You want to ask?
Sure.
Kellyanne Sardella, Department of Civil Service, Classification and Compensation.
Kelly Reynolds, Department of Civil Service, Class and Com.
Jim Galvin, Department of Civil Service, Staffing Services Division.
Lori Rexford, Department of Civil Service, Staffing Services Division.
Thank you.
Just one thing before we begin. I'd just like to remind everyone that we've reserved 1 hour for this conference because of the Commissioner's schedule, and I just would like to make sure everyone hears that. Commissioner?
Thank you. I guess who would like to speak first in terms of the item? How about we start with DFS, Superintendent?
Sure, absolutely. And good morning, Commissioner Ahl and Commissioner Green, and thank you for affording me the opportunity to meet with you today. I want to actually acknowledge and thank the staff present from Civil Service, from PEF, from OMSI, and DFS staff, whether here in person or watching this meeting, because I do appreciate their attention to this important matter. As I mentioned, my name is Maria Vullo. I'm the Superintendent of the Department of Financial Services. I've been in this role as nominated by the Governor and confirmed by the New York State Senate since February of 2016, and it's a true pleasure to serve in this role. I wanted to meet today to discuss this title modernization initiative that is the next and critically important step in completing the merger for the agency and to advancing the agency's goals as set forth by the Governor and the legislature when the agency was created in 2011. My vision as the superintendent has been from the start to create one DFS, a team that works together to advance the agency's mission and to serve the people of this great state. And helping me in this, or sitting to my left, my Director of Administration has been introduced, Chad Loshbach, and my Chief of Staff, Heather McCorn. Just a bit of background on DFS, which I believe is relevant to the matters before you today. Following the 2008 financial crisis, Governor Cuomo and the legislature created DFS by merging the former New York State banking and insurance departments, and that happened in 2011 under the Financial Services Law, which was a new law created. DFS is now one agency, not two separate agencies. It's much more than a combination of those two predecessor agencies. The creation of DFS was necessitated by the factors that led to the financial crisis and the ever-evolving risks that the financial services industry faces. DFS's mission is therefore broader than and different than the prior two departments, which is why we have this initiative before you today. DFS's mission, as set forth in the statute, is to reform the regulation of the financial services industries, to keep pace with their rapid and dynamic evolution, to guard against financial crises, and most importantly, to protect consumers and markets from fraud. Financial services is certainly fast-paced and ever-evolving. It demands bold regulatory leadership. The challenges we face include money laundering, terrorist financing, cybersecurity, affordable health care, mortgage and insurance fraud, and consumer protection, among many other things that we do at DFS. Since I've arrived at the agency, I've stressed my vision to have one DFS, to break down the silos, to be the best state regulator in the country. Last summer and a few weeks ago, I did some agency-wide town hall meetings. I stressed this vision of one DFS. I stated that no matter whether one came from the former insurance department or the former banking department or from neither former agency, we are one agency, that is the Department of Financial Services. And I've also communicated my intention to focus on the employees, on their morale and on their training, and to erase the old lines of demarcation between the previous standalone departments that create difficulties of integration, difficulties of career advancement. I've also discussed the importance that DFS be on top of the evolving financial services industry, and that erasing those previous lines of insurance and banking, along with other initiatives to modernize the agency, would enable us to run more smoothly, to tackle today's priorities and challenges with less redundancy and much more internal collaboration. And in doing so, we will both broaden and expand opportunities for everyone at the agency. I've met and heard from many DFS employees throughout the year. I've met and talked with them through walkthroughs at the DFS locations, at town hall and diversity events, at picnics and at holiday parties, and in the elevators and the hallways when I see people every day. I've hired staff to focus specifically on communication, recognition, and training of our employees. I launched an internal newsletter, a modern intranet, and I reinstated various superintendent awards to recognize outstanding employee achievement and dedication. I hired a new, experienced director of training and a brand new training staff devoted to developing and delivering cutting-edge training to all of our employees so that they are prepared for the evolving, changing financial services industry. I hired a new compliance director dedicated to streamlining and modernizing agency procedures. I hired a new IT director to modernize our legacy systems. I've laid out a vision for my staff to provide better labor relations and coordination with the unions, improved and streamlined shared services and backroom operations, resulting in enhanced customer service delivery, and, very importantly, a fair delivery of promotions. Since I began, I've authorized up to 200 promotions of staff throughout the agency. These were long overdue and well-deserved. Our next step is to modernize our titles to make us one DFS in a way that protects all current employees and unionized members. Last fall, the Department of Civil Service communicated to all agency commissioners and superintendents that they wanted to work closely with agencies to modernize the civil service system. I took that opportunity to meet with civil service. We've partnered on this initiative, collaborating on solutions using the tools of the civil service law and best practices at other state agencies. DFS is modernizing, but within the structure of the existing civil service law and practices. As you know, titles and positions are the core element of any agency's workforce and the foundation of staff duties and responsibilities. Current DFS titles are in the competitive, non-competitive, and exempt jurisdictional classes, designated as PEF, CSCA, and MC. Currently, we have DFS-specific titles as well as titles that exist at multiple state agencies. Our titles are still labeled with the bank and insurance nomenclature. We also have multiple standalone specialist titles. The Title Modernization Initiative before you today will create a new paradigm in which all DFS employees will have greater career mobility, with more titles that have expanded utility and advancement, all while protecting civil service rights and respecting the legal parameters of the civil service law. Essential to this title modernization is the elimination and replacement of the bank and insurance nomenclature to financial services, because that's the name of the agency. The change will immediately eliminate the limited career mobility options that currently exist between the agency's various divisions and title series. This will allow DFS staff to move to salary grades not currently available in their existing title series. Instead of staff having a singular linear advancement opportunity, they will have multiple advancement opportunities in different functional operational areas across the agency as it should be, because it's one agency. We will be able to hire and promote throughout the agency into positions that reflect a modern, top-notch regulator, consistently with DFS's mission and the current needs and challenges of the financial services industry in New York, so that we can best protect our markets and our consumers. We believe this will lead to greater unionized membership and the centralization of recruitment and selection processes. What is in front of you today deals with the non-competitive and exempt jurisdictional classes because of the impracticability to examine and your statutory purview. What we are proposing through title structure changes, title consolidation, and new titles happens all the time through the daily administration of the State Civil Service Program, and it's not unique. On a side note, but related to our proposals, I met with our agency PEF council leaders, PEF and GOER, on February 21. GOER advised as to who the attendees at that meeting should be. At the meeting, I indicated the nature and content of these proposals that are before you today. The meeting was positive and productive. At the end of the meeting, I stated that my staff was available to meet and discuss more in detail when requested. The only follow-up request we received from PEF was for a meeting on March 8, which my staff was unable to attend on that day. However, my staff offered to meet on a different day and to respond to any questions. As of today, my staff has not received any additional meeting requests or formal questions. And again, to be clear, what I am proposing today will lead to no staff losing their current salary, union representation, jurisdictional classification, or job. What I am proposing today will allow the agency to transform to meet the immediate needs of our consumers and the fast-paced changing financial services industry. We face great risks, and we need to modernize in the face of those risks to our financial services industry in New York and, frankly, nationwide. What I am proposing today will allow the agency to immediately meet new legislative and regulatory mandates related to, among other things, cybersecurity, zombie properties, virtual currency, internal controls, paid family leave, enforcement, and so on, all things that are now within DFS's responsibility as directed by the governor and the legislature in legislation that is passed. And these are all state priorities. Again, thank you for your time and the opportunity to present my vision as to why we're seeking the immediate civil service requests under your consideration. My staff is here, as you know, and we're available to answer any questions that you may have. Again, thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Santo, would you like to go next?
Well, good morning, and thank you, Commissioner Ahl and Commissioner Green, for this opportunity to address you. And OMSI does not believe that the request from the Department of Financial Services, the overall concept of the title structure changes and the title consolidation, is in spirit of what the Department of Financial Services statute actually says at this point. I want to concentrate on one of the management confidential positions, the Deputy Superintendent of Banks, which is a singular position that they seek to go and move under the guise of simple title consolidation over to the Deputy Superintendent listing that's in the rules. It's a very complex issue, and it's an issue cloaked in the possibility of political ideology interfering with the professional work done on behalf of the public by competitive class employees. The title consolidation at DFS is a nice soundbite, but it must also be done within the confines of the applicable statutes, not just for convenience. When created, the Department of Financial Services underwent much scrutiny during the budget process that created it. Section 205 of the Financial Services Law calmed many of the stakeholders' fears that somehow there would be a draconian change on how the laws would be enforced. The compromise spelled out in the law calls for two divisions of work as existed prior to the merger. That is, a division for banking and a division for insurance. Nothing can be clearer than that part of the statute. One might even say the Civil Service Commission is statutorily barred from even dealing with this issue, since the financial services law mandates that separation and maintenance of two distinct divisions. Yes, call them silos, call them whatever you want.
Can I stop you right there, Mr. Santo? How would we be barred from that?
Because the statute basically says you can't combine both the insurance and the banking into one
No, it does
department.
not. The statute says there has to be two divisions. It does not say you can't combine them.
Well, I would believe that you have to keep them separate.
Well,
the law
do
is
we
very
keep our
specific.
divisions separate at civil service?
No. What I'm saying is, but you have staffing services representatives, you have people that are in class and comp. Those titles are specific titles. You don't call them civil service representatives 1, civil service representative 2, 3, and 4. The division and the division of work is very specifically delineated in this department, and I believe has to continue at the Department of Financial Services.
Okay.
And I think it's even more so, in fact, that it even spelled it out. There's no such spelling out of this in the civil service law, but here we do have a specific spelling out. And there was a great deal of debate and compromise in the budget process, if you go back and actually look at the discourse when this was created. The attempt to take the executive deputy superintendent banks and combine it with the existing 5 exempt deputy superintendent positions approved by the commission based on the supporting documentation that was presented years ago when they were insurance positions prior to the merger of the banking and insurance department, it's wrong. It's wrong to combine that for many reasons. The financial services law, again, specifically delineates that there will be work silos or separation of the powers and duties contained within the singular agency. There will be an insurance division and there will be a banking division. Next, the actual titles themselves are distinctly stated. The deputy superintendent 5 insurance positions have been and are classified as exempt. Over in the banking division, we have additional positions, currently 8, approved as deputy superintendent of banks. These are M8 positions, classified as competitive jobs, the culminating end of the bank examiner series. There is a long, detailed history as to the banking department, now DFS Banking Division, focusing on the examination of all of New York State chartered banks through the exceptional work of the bank examiners who properly have been placed in a competitive class, culminating in the deputy superintendent of banks at the M8 position. It's not an accident. It's a deliberate assignment of these positions in a competitive class because they can be examined, and secondly, to protect the individuals charged to perform these duties from unnecessary and exterior political influence in the performance of their duties. We believe that this distinction, that the banking division is overseen by deputy superintendents that are in the competitive class, is important. And it's an intrinsic part of what constitutes the division of labor spelled out in the statute creating the merged agency. What's now being proposed appears to be offered as a simple title consolidation plan, but in reality is the creation of 6 deputy superintendents that can work in either division, generic titles. If the agency determines that the current arrangement needs to be altered, then it must seek the appropriate statutory and rule changes to create additional deputy superintendent banks positions as exempt positions. To mingle the specific deputy superintendent positions of each division into one group is contrary historically to the intent of the financial services law, and certainly is without any commission review as to the duties and responsibilities for the positions that are yet to be created for the banking division, which again is unique in the fact that the highest levels maintained the need for competitive appointment. Concurrent with the merger request before you is the other shoe. The agency is now seeking to create an exempt position, Deputy Superintendent for Foreign and Wholesale Banks. This position does not appear in the rules and appears to be a conversion of a Deputy Superintendent position established in the rules as an insurance position and now used to fill the banking division position. The latest attempt to fill this position negates the previous withdrawn postings that announced the position as a Deputy Superintendent of Banks, M8 competitive. And in my letter to Class and Comp of March 1st, the response to my earlier request for the opinion negates the impact of Section 205 of the Financial Services Law, and Class and Comp maintains that the merger was not meant to keep these functions siloed nor prevent the proper deployment of staff resources. I maintain that the law did so specify, and that this is not a proper deployment of staff resources as confined by the statute that created the agency. 2 divisions of work were established, and to merge exempt bank titles onto the 5 exempt insurance deputy superintendent positions apparently gives support and credibility to an arrangement that cannot be sustained when the statute clearly envisioned a continued separation of their respective divisional duties and responsibilities. The Department of Financial Services, through the slew of requests to the department, the Commission is seeking to change the very nature of the agency into a non-competitive hiring hall, using the financial collapse of 2008 and the changing nature of financial instruments as the rationale for your quick action on this and all of their other pending requests. Blurring of the specific work that statutorily is to be undertaken by 2 separate divisions of that agency. The bottom line is that if one looks at the 5-year capital plan that has been in the last number of budgets, including this year's executive budget, you begin to see that there is budgetary dependence on billions from fines and settlements, the cash, dictating that the agency must now abandon its lengthy commitment to a competitive workforce and embrace a new order calling for a non-competitive exempt workforce. Civil service, the merit system, was created to protect and serve the public, not to foster or support a political ideology or a budget strategy. I urge the Commission to reject this merger of titles and to carefully weigh the hundreds of non-competitive and exempt positions now being requested for your acceptance by the Department of Financial Services. We compliment the employees of the Department of Financial Services for their admirable and exceptional work. And we urge the Commission not to approve any of these requests today, and at the very least, to seek an opinion of the Attorney General as to the efficacy of your ability to act in this manner.
Mr. Jones, do you have something you'd like to add on this matter?
Yes.
And it doesn't have to be specific to just this one specific title, but globally, if you will.
Right. Commissioner Ahl, Commissioner Green, as you know, I wasn't the intended speaker here today, so I don't have prepared remarks. But the Civil Service Commission was created over 2 centuries ago, back in the late 1800s, to get rid of the spoils system and ensure that merit and fitness was the key to hiring by the state. You sit here in the shoes of people since then who are the guardians of merit and fitness, and ensuring that we do not go back to the situation we had before when basically all employees were exempt. We have here the Department of Financial Services, which deals with huge amounts of money. And the nature of civil service protects the employees' jobs so that they can be whistleblowers if they see anything that they think is not proper. What the department here is proposing is a wholesale revamping of the department, moving position after position from the competitive class to the non-competitive class, or from non-competitive to exempt, or in the case of the 3 positions that Joe was speaking about earlier, from competitive all the way to exempt. The law provides that in all cases, examination will be competitive unless not practicable. Clearly, it's been practicable in the past. Now we have the department coming here saying we need this flexibility. Well, you know, I'm sure that you have sat here through many people coming before you saying we need this flexibility, and your job here is to separate the wheat from the chaff and make sure that in fact these jobs do require that flexibility that they can't be tested for. And we have before us here a number of positions which have been tested for in the past, and you continue to test for, which they would remove from that competitive testing. And so what do they say? They say that this is going to increase promotional possibilities for their staff. Well, right now their staff, their promotional possibilities are all the way up to an M8 through competitive examination, and they would get rid of that and make it much more in the agency's ability to appoint whomever they want. And we're supposed to believe that this is going to increase promotional possibilities. This isn't going to increase promotional possibilities. This is going to increase appointments of people from outside the agency rather than the promotional possibilities. So I come before you today and ask you that to slow this down, to look into this further, and to allow more time to pass for us to come before you. This is on extremely short notice. With, to the best of my knowledge, I don't know if an agency has ever come before you with this many changes at one time. And I think that at the end of the day that you'll find that many of these requests are not warranted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Before we go back, because it might make sense to have DFS respond, I wanted to give an opportunity to both class and comp and staffing to offer comment on this proposal or all of these proposals before us.
One thing I want to talk about is this notion that separate divisions can't use the same titles. That's just not the case. For example, one that comes to mind right now is the workers' comp fund and the disability funds at the state insurance fund. They actually have different reporting requirements to DFS. They use the same titles within both of those distinct program areas. Also, I can think of something like labor services reps at the Department of Labor. They're used in completely two different program areas. So that we don't necessarily have to have agency-specific, program-specific titles. If the work is similar, we are looking as a division overall and a department overall to sort of streamline our titles and looking at title consolidation opportunities. So if there's like work and like minimum qualifications, we would prefer to use one title.
Okay.
Commissioners, our review of the title structure that's resulted from the reorganization of the agency, we have found that the complexity that will result in the duties performed by the incumbents of these positions creates a situation where it would be impracticable for us to hold competitive examinations.
Okay. Appreciate that. Superintendent, if you will, and might I suggest, because there are many items before the commission, is that maybe we work through each item and we take each item individually on the face of that item, and as we go through, if you would like to offer comments and a rationale as to why you are seeking the classification that you are and the justification behind that, that would be helpful, I think, in terms of having a good dialogue with all the parties here involved.
Sure, we'd be happy to do that, and I certainly may defer to Mr. Loshbar on some of these in terms of the specific titles. If I could just, there were just two things that was said that I just wanted to comment on. The statutory question. There's no question that this complies with the statute. We have assessments that we must do of our entities under the banking law, and we have assessments that we must do of our entities under the insurance law. And so structurally, we have a number of different divisions in the agency, not only banking and insurance, but we have a capital markets division, and we have a, financial frauds and consumer protection division, and we have, real estate finance division, which actually has banking and others in it. Capital markets has banking and insurance titles in the same division in the agency. And so we don't, it's not like it's just two divisions. So I don't see any issue with the legal aspect of it, and obviously I am very much focused on ensuring that anything that we do is as the statute mandates. The Deputy Superintendent for Foreign and Wholesale Banks, that's an internal title that presently exists, and the person has vacated the position, so we're just posting for it. So that's still a Deputy Superintendent Banks, but that's actually an internal title that exists. So I think there may be just a misunderstanding with respect to that. But then, we're happy to go through with whatever order you'd like to do. I just wanted to comment on that.
Each item as it is, and then offer the comment, and we'll go forward.
The first item we have is to add 16 positions of Chief Actuary. This was requested to the Commission as Financial Services Actuary. And this is for the exempt class.
So in talking about actuaries, we had multiple conversations with civil service staff about the actuarial field, and a good portion of our actuarial positions are interdepartmental titles, and this in no way is meant to limit or inhibit anybody's civil service rights for promotion in those titles. What we were looking for here was to create a senior level actuarial title that gives us flexibility to be able to look at the financial services industry related to actuarial services, and then either be able to promote within and give career mobility to staff that may not otherwise have it, or to be able to identify specific functions related to actuarial services, such as pension, that we don't necessarily touch upon today, to be able to bring or train somebody to be able to do that function.
And Superintendent, just as an additional comment, the individuals that are currently in civil service titles, you mentioned that their salary will not change under this policy, as well as the staffing. They're not going to be moved or transitioned.
But it actually provides them with sort of opportunities. So if you happen to be right now in a banking title series, you can't actually be eligible for promotion in the insurance title series. And, or in certain areas of the agency that are kind of a mix of the two. And so it creates some real difficulties. Your line is linear only. It's not throughout the agency. So no, I have no intention of changing, the existing, their titles their civil service lines may become financial services in terms of it, but I don't have any intention of changing their salary or their job security.
Okay, thank
you. Or their unionized, membership.
Superintendent or Chad, so the issue before us is just the jurisdictional classification of these 16 positions that you are requesting. And I just want to speak a little bit on something that Mr. Galvin said and make sure I'm understanding it clearly, because you've used it quite consistently throughout all of your proposals. And you say that the state examination process is too static and does not allow the agency to keep pace with the constantly changing financial services industry for advanced or experienced actuarial professionals. And I'd like to hear a little bit more about that, because we have heard that argument put forward before this commission, because we have been experiencing a lot of requests from agencies as they go through title modernization. And so I just would like to understand that a little bit better. That is something we've heard more in the IT world. We've heard more in homeland security issues. That's not something I've been aware of yet in the financial services. So maybe you could just speak a little bit to that, please.
Well, the financial services law itself is dramatically changing, and the regulations that we're involved with is dramatically changing. So related to the titles themselves, and this is, like you said, this is overbroad with all of the titles. In order for us to be current in our activities in relation to the financial services law. Looking at a different model is very important, and that's why we partnered with Civil Service, with the staff at Civil Service, to say this is where the agency is, this is where the agency is going, this is how our titles currently today play into that configuration, and how does this relate to where the Department of Civil Service is going in relation to modernization, title consolidation, and then the future of state government. So in that, the discussions back and forth with the staff at Civil Service, what we came up with was, in looking at these different fields of whether it's actuarial services that are very important to our industry here, and a good example is like paid family leave. We've been asked to do the actuarial assessments related to paid family leave, and those have to be put out and available, I believe, in January 2018. So right now, we have a situation where we don't necessarily have people to do that in-house, and so we've had to contracted it out actuarial services. And in trying to get away from contracting, the best approach would be to try to create some type of title that would allow us to do it ourselves.
Here on the actuaries, we have the paid family leave, we have pension, we still don't have a pension actuary. We haven't been able to hire. And the healthcare side is a tremendous need for actuaries right now, and of course we're looking at some very, very serious changes at the federal level with respect to the Affordable Care Act and Obamacare, and we regulate the commercial health insurance market in New York. And so getting the ability to have sort of senior level actuaries, and we don't believe it's practicable to examine for that, is something that's so critical to main parts of the agency. So that's the specific to the actuaries. And Chad is absolutely right on paid family leave. We contracted out for that, and that's unfortunate.
So this is a chief that we're speaking of.
Yes.
What are the positions that filter up to it?
We have
those
we have assistant actuaries. We have I think supervising actuaries, principal actuaries.
And are those all competitive?
Those are all competitive. They
positions?
go 14, 19, 24, maybe M4, M5, M6, M7. Or 28, yeah, 28.
Okay.
And so those are all competitive. And there's no intent to get rid of those lines, not at all. And on that point, people will still have, as I mentioned earlier, people are still going to have career mobility options in the competitive side through all those lines, and those are all interdepartmental lines as well.
All right, and you see that needing to have that flexibility to move through both bureaus, if you will. Are these positions that are found in both bureaus of your agency or in multiple bureaus of your agency?
The actuaries they're in various different divisions, but they tend to be more on the insurance side than on the banking side, although, we're seeing more and more of an interrelation between banking and insurance on a whole host of things. Because you have banks that are acquiring insurance companies or assets, and so our examiners are needing to sort of be able to look at that. So we're seeing more of that, but I don't want, mainly it's in various areas, but mainly the actuaries are insurance because they tend to be liability focused.
Right, so the skills and knowledge that you're going to be really looking for has to be up to date. I mean, the law changes so regularly.
No question. No question. No question. And critically important to what we do. I mean, again, the family leave program is figuring out actuarially what the claims are going to be, how many people are going to use the program. We hope a lot will use the family leave program. It's obviously a big initiative of the governor, and we have to actually price it. We have to say how much the employee contributions are. And, as I said, we needed to hire outside, and this is a program that every year we will have to do that. On an annual basis, we set health insurance rates. That's actuarial work. We, in our examinations, when you have troubled insurance companies, the big issue is a life insurance company, how do you project their liabilities when people are buying life insurance? 30 years from now, they may actually the beneficiary will take the benefit. Being able to project those things out is an actuarial task and very, very important to our regular work and sort of the need for being really up to date on that in the modern products and the modern world of financial services, which has a lot of risk to it.
Superintendent, I know that this request was made of the commission for the exempt jurisdictional classification. However, there does seem to be such a specialized skill set associated with these positions, and it just seems to me that non-competitive with a FI designation would likely lend itself better to this, given that there are skill sets that you are aggressively looking for, and knowing that the market is changing so rapidly and you need to be responsive to that. So that is something that I would recommend we consider going forward on this request.
Excuse me,
Yes.
Commissioners. I know an uncle of mine was an actuary, and they do have standards. There's a series of examinations that you take in addition to experience. It's a lot of high-level math. When they get like quarter, you're a 10 and a quarter point actuary versus an 11 actuary, and as you progress and gain experience, you actually take these series, just
Like a Series 6 or a Series 7 test.
Yeah.
There are, for their own, specialties.
Yeah.
I'll say that I don't have the numbers, but many of our actuaries are actually not certified by those tests, which is a real challenge for us because, and why we do think that exempt is important for this, to be able to get people that may have that classification. A lot of ours don't, and I'll tell you where it comes into play is that when we do an examination of the public pension funds, for example, there is a requirement that it be a certified pension actuary. I don't have one to be able to do that, so we would have to contract out to get that, and the department has done that in the past. To be able to do that. That's a very large expense because that actuary has to do all the work on the exam to be able to certify it. You can't just bring them in for a little piece of it. The other place where this comes into play is that if we are challenged by one of our companies, one of our regulated entities, in a decision making that we have, we say to them, you're under reserved. You haven't set enough money aside for those future liabilities. And they challenge us on that, and we go to administrative hearing. Our actuaries do not have the certification, and that could be a detriment to us if this ever got to court, because the insurance company will then hire an actuary that has the certification, and then there'll be a battle of experts. I will defend our actuaries and say they know their stuff, no question, but that certification is actually very, very important, and we don't actually have many that have it in the agency now.
Is it a costly test?
It's not a
I know we've had
requirement
this-
for them to have under, and it's, I don't know if you know, they don't. We don't have, and I think there is a real need to find people who do have that certification.
And is that something that you envision as an agency when you are aggressively recruiting to fill these positions, that is a preferred qual that you would be putting out?
Not for everybody, but certain, we need to have more that have that certification.
Okay.
Everyone doesn't have to, have that.
So it's not an industry requirement that
It
to
is
be an
not.
actuary, you must
It is
have
not.
that. So unlike an engineer, if you will, or some of these other titles that require professional licensure, this one, it doesn't prevent you from functioning in that capacity.
It doesn't, although
Unless-
the two ways that is a
Okay.
real challenge for us, because we can't certify the pension report, or the pension exam, without a pension actuary that has the certification. And if we are challenged, we have a real issue that a court might determine that the actuary that has all of the bells and whistles from industry hiring is the one that should be believed by the judge, as opposed to the staff actuary, who I might say probably has the deep knowledge and is better, but that's just not the way it works. And so we have faced this issue with actuaries for some time, and I really think given everything that we're doing now and the difficulties and the new requirements of the agency that require actuaries, that's why we're making this proposal. Again, we're keeping the competitive lines as well.
Right.
Yeah, we're keeping the competitive lines. But we need to try to bring in others on this.
Okay.
Is there anything more on that, you think? Okay. So that's the actuarial challenge.
Do we want to vote on that or hear the next one? Oh, go ahead,
I
Deb.
just wanted to add that actually OSC does have some exempt actuarial titles, and it's really specifically geared, as it was described to us, towards those pension actuarial activities. So they do utilize.
And I could
some
imagine
exempt
that these are
positions.
difficult to recruit for
Yes.
titles across the board.
Very difficult.
Okay.
I mean, very difficult.
Well, given
Very
the
difficult
skill
in
set.
general, given the skill sets and you know, I mean, compensation in the private sector, I mean, obviously, but very difficult. But, you know, we audit OSC.
Right.
That's one of our tasks. And so that's where we face this issue where we don't have the pension actuaries that are able to actually sign off on an exam report.
Would the Commissioner like to vote on this?
Well, this one is an item before us in its own, separated out from the other items. So I
Yes.
would suggest we take action on this.
I agree.
I'm prepared to recommend approval
Yeah, for the 16
for the
positions.
16 chief actuaries in the exempt
Exempt
class.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item is for the Director of Financial Services Programs 1, and this is for unlimited number of positions, grade 31. And the Director of Financial Services 2, for unlimited number of positions, grade 33. These are both for the non-competitive class. And the third one is for the exempt class is Director of Financial Services Program 3.
And that's 50 positions.
Yes.
Chad, did you want to speak to these?
Yeah, so in talking with civil service, we were talking about the current configuration of the agency and the future conception of the agency. And we talked about high-level managerial titles. And so in our discussions, we looked at the Department of Health, which has a title series today called Health Program Director. 1, 2, and 3. First two levels are non-competitive. The third level is exempt. The first two levels are have unlimited numbers. The top level has limiting numbers. All three levels are MC. In looking at that title series and thinking about the future of the agency, we wanted to develop a very similar title series that allowed us not only to give career mobility to very experienced staff in the agency to be able to go from where they are today to a director level, but also the ability to bring in staff with very explicit and very experienced regulated industry type of backgrounds. So in talking about the future and being able to tie in our examiners and our specialists and our investigators and our actuaries and all the other different title series in the state, we felt that trying to establish the Director Financial Service Program title series was appropriate, not only because of where we want to go with the agency, but also because in looking at the Department of Health and how they operate, we wanted to take their best practice and do something very similar to what they have done as well. One big difference between what we're proposing today and the Department of Health, just as a side note, is I believe all three levels of the Department of Health, the two non-competitive and the exempt, are MC, where we are proposing that the first two levels be PEF.
Okay. And this is a new title series for DFS?
Correct.
Does it replace an existing title series?
Our intent right now is not to have it replace any title series.
So these would all be new hires?
They could be new hires,
Or they could
Or
be
people
internal
promoting in,
promotions.
or, okay.
Right, with the idea being the sort of program directors because of the, you know, like a paid family leave program, or we have in the budget, if this gets passed, we have a student loan servicing bill in there. You know, there are a number of different new, you know, program areas that we're getting into that are not really tied specifically to sort of prior, positions in the agency. But where, as Chad said, non-competitive, the two series would be PEF, and then there'd be one exempt, but people in the agency would be fully able to apply for those positions, and we would hope get them. It's a managerial piece that's needed to manage some of these program areas.
Can we speak to, and I know you alluded that this was modeled after the Department of Health's program.
Right.
Why the need for unlimited numbers?
We just mirrored the Department of Health's proposal at the first two levels, and that's what Department of Health has. If we had to put limited numbers in, I don't know if we'd necessarily be opposed to that. I think we'd probably go with 50 for each of the levels, just to give us the flexibility to figure out exactly how we're going to use this going forward and to manage it with the different programs that are coming up.
And you anticipate that this program will be of that scale?
I think that if you look at the changing law,
Right.
and then all the different regulations that we put out there, and then even this legislative agenda with the aggressive agenda that we have, having that flexibility to be able to adapt to that very timely, very, very well could mean that these get filled.
Yeah, I mean, like another example, I mean, in the legislative agenda is the pharmaceutical provisions where we're going to have a whole new responsibility. So those are sort of program manager type things. Obviously we still have our fill caps that the Division of Budget gives us, but we thought it made sense to model this after the Department of Health on programs.
And I just want to be clear, is the department's contention that much like the chief actuary, this is a career or a title series that you do not feel lends itself to competitive exam?
That is
Again,
absolutely
is this
correct.
because of the rapidly changing regulated environment?
Absolutely.
Being responsive to the different pieces that you regulate?
Absolutely, and it's the rapidly evolving financial services industry. It's also the creation of DFS with the financial services law. Because DFS, we follow the insurance law, the banking law, and the financial services law, which was a new law that gave DFS new powers. I mean, we have a whole financial frauds and consumer protection bureau that didn't exist before with the separate departments. We have the capital markets, the risks, the trends. That was something that wasn't really part of the prior siloed departments. So, I mean, the financial crisis taught everyone a lot, and that was that these things are interrelated, and you have to look at, financial products on the whole, and you have to be looking at issues like money laundering and terrorist financing and cybersecurity and all of those things. It's a very evolving and changing world. I mean, while we still have all of the terrific work that the staff does, mainly the competitive staff, on the examinations of our entities, but we have lots of program and policy areas where these types of titles are intended to bring about with a lot of the work that we're doing that's separate from this supervision work, if you will. That
so
makes
these
sense.
are just the areas that you just mentioned. That's new regulatory responsibilities
Absolutely.
that your agency has been requested
Correct.
to oversee.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, that's a
Yes.
lot of areas of
It's
law.
a
that
lot
come
of
about.
areas. I mean, we've come out with a lot of new things. We have the new zombie properties legislation.
What is a zombie property?
Oh,
The zombie properties is, a zombie property is a vacant and abandoned property. So after the foreclosure crisis, the financial crisis, you had, the dropping prices of real estate, the dropping value of real estate. People left their homes because the homes were not valued as high as their mortgages, and they vacated these homes, or people died and the homes were vacated. And so we have neighborhoods across the state that have, and it's a term that was created, zombie properties that are blights to the neighborhood. We now have, a law was just passed and it went into effect December 20th, where all banks and mortgage services report to DFS on their zombie properties. They have to maintain them. We have enforcement authority over them, so we have a whole staff, hopefully, that's gearing up for that. So that's what it's.
How do you recruit for this new skill set?
You know, like I said, there are skill sets within the agency that could be, interested in that. We've actually done what we could within the agency to even move people. So there's definitely skill sets in the agency that would be available for this, but recruiting people from the outside that are interested in policies and programs and, consumer work. There are people that want to do really good work in government, that are not within the sort of, practical examination process, right? The people that have certain kinds of policy or consumer experience, or in this case, real estate experience, or, mortgage lending, or, that kind of experience. Kind of a different skill set. That's just the zombie property. Paid family leave, right? It's just, yeah. It's, people that, again, have policy experience for something like that. Or cybersecurity, which is something we'll talk about in the specialist titles. I mean, that's a very, very unique and today experience that we desperately need to be able to hire people for.
Could we hear from staffing and C&C? Both of the divisions concurred that this lends itself to non-competitive, and both concurred it also lends itself to unlimited numbers. Just if you could offer a brief overview quickly on that.
I'll address the unlimited numbers if you want to talk about the JC status. I think looking at all the different specialty areas that they had proposed, everything from the virtual currency, the financial crime risk, sort of looking at how many management positions they had right now, we thought that the agency was going to need to request a good amount of positions at the first and second level, so that's why we were okay with the unlimited numbers. Of course, as they need them, they're still going to have to submit a package to us,
Right.
an org chart, so we'll see where they're being used, but to sort of give that
I just always like to
flexibility.
make sure there's still a check and a balance in
Yes,
place.
yes.
Whenever we
Yep.
have unlimited
Mhm.
numbers, I feel like it's
Yes.
important to maintain that.
No, the standard classification package would still need to be submitted through us at least. Yeah.
Okay.
And the initial proposal, as said, was Department of Health has done
Yes,
pretty much the same.
we had looked at
proposal.
health and sort of drew that comparison because, right now they're also in a state of a rapidly changing environment. They have a ton of new initiatives, and we thought that, that comparison to their directors was strong.
Good.
Because they're coming up with needing to oversee areas that they never even conceived of
Yeah.
before and having to deal with the transition of those services. If local social services districts previously performed the functions and they're taking on some of their staff and seeing how that would go in terms of what happens to the future of the program, just in their first go-around, the Department of Health has completely changed how they're going to handle that program. And what they initially thought they would need has been scrapped,
Yeah.
and we're now in the process of working with them directly with their program managers and with HR to be able to say, okay, this is what we thought it would be, and now we found out it's not. And because each time they go through that process, they need to be able to have someone who understands the needs of the program going forward and to best address that. And it's not something that we want them to be coming in and requesting a new specific title for that certain function, which may change again.
Okay.
Commissioners, our recommendation for non-competitive was based upon the agency's description of the dynamic nature of the financial services industry, and that we did not see that we would be able to produce timely examinations in order for them to recruit the individuals with the necessary experience to fill these jobs. For the exempt level, the agency described a level of confidentiality and sensitivity based upon the reporting nature of these positions.
And that's at the top level, that's with the limiting number of 50
Right.
on that one?
Correct.
Okay. Thanks, Jim. Do you have any additional questions? Yes, please. On the case of Director of Financial Services Programs 1, Director of Financial Services Programs 2, both with unlimited numbers, recommended for the non-competitive class, jurisdictional classification. I vote in support of.
I concur.
And also for the Director of Financial Services Programs 3 with a limiting number of 50, requested in the exempt jurisdictional classification, and due to the close and confidential relationship that has been established that would be necessary, I vote we approve.
I just want to make it clear for the record that the non-competitive jurisdictional classification requests also include a FI tag.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Okay, thank you, Al.
The next one is one we talked about earlier. This was to add an additional position of deputy superintendent, which is being reclassified from deputy superintendent banks exempt to the exempt jurisdictional class.
Before we begin on this one, and I'll allow, because I know this was an issue for you, Mr. Santo specifically, and before we have both agencies, both DFS and the union speak to this, I just want to revisit the section of law that you reference. I'm not a lawyer. I do not pretend to be one. But when I read this, nowhere do I see that it takes away the ability of an agency head to manage their resources as they need to be and be responsive to. And so I am struggling to see how a title such as deputy superintendent cannot be fluid, knowing that the skill set is the same, albeit in different divisions. So I guess I'd like to understand this.
I mean, I think that's part of the issue that I was trying to get across, is that the deputy superintendent of insurance, let me just back up one bit. There was a comment made about the Department of Labor and how they have the UNISERV representatives. Having been intimately involved in that at that time, that operates under a waiver from the U.S. Department of Labor, because the law specifically still states that they're supposed to have a UI and a job service section separate. It's combined in New York State under a waiver agreement with the U.S. Department of Labor. So I just wanted to make sure the record was clear on that point.
I appreciate that.
Now, I think it's very clear that, yes, they have flexibility, but the flexibility must be maintained as far as having a banking division and an insurance division. And the problem is that this commission was given years ago, prior to 2012, very specific rationale and reasons as to why deputy superintendent, 5 positions, so classified in the rules, are in the insurance division. There's no documentation provided to take this deputy superintendent banks and move it over, and now the whole deputy superintendent of insurances are all considered to be, oh, they can be banking jobs, they can be insurance jobs, they can be whatever we want. And we say, no.
But let me interrupt you right there, because this is where I'm struggling. This is a new department. This is the Department of Financial Services. This is not the insurance department. This is not the banking department. They are gone. This is the Department of Financial Services. And so while I appreciate that there has to be 2 distinct divisions, there are multiple divisions in the Department of Civil Service. They each have their own role to play. But that does not mean that there could not be a title series that lends itself to both. And I'm struggling with why you think the law says that there can only be deputies on this side competitive, deputies on this side not competitive, and that was looked at when they were under their old structures. This is a new, broader in scope agency. And nowhere do I see that in the law. And I guess...
I don't know why you don't see it. I think it's very specific. I think the law says that there are 2 silos. There's a
it does not say silos. It says nowhere is there silos.
That's the term of
but
art.
But it is semantics, and that's what
the
we're
term
going
of art.
down
That's
to.
the term of art that Class and Comp likes to use, so let me use it as well. I mean, the bottom line here is that the deputy superintendent of insurance, deputy superintendent title, the 5 that exist, have been assigned traditionally and historically to the insurance department. if they want to take this one job that's, there's a little bit of confusion.
But there's no more insurance department.
There is an insurance division.
Right, but there's no more insurance
That
department.
nothing has come to you.
But those
but
positions
nothing
were
has come to you.
contemplated, Mr. Santo, when there were two separate agencies.
But nothing has come to you, Commissioner, justifying a deputy, they really are confused themselves. Sometimes they refer to it as deputy superintendent of banks, sometimes as deputy superintendent of banks, sometimes as deputy superintendent for banks. The problem is that sometimes they advertise it as a title unto itself. Sometimes they advertise it as deputy superintendent of banks, the M8 competitive position, with a working title of deputy superintendent for foreign and wholesale banks. I mean, there seems to be confusion as to where they want to go. When they started looking at filling this singular position for wholesale banks and foreign banks, they started out looking at that as an M8 position, a competitive position. Now they changed their mind and they figure, oh, this is something that we have to fill this way. There is a confusion as far as looking at these highest level titles. And if you're talking about something that's going to be in the banking division, I do think they are siloed into keeping it in the examinable series, and that it has to be a competitive series. I think the law is very specific. I think the stakeholders were told that they were not going to lose that part of what they're paying for. I think we forget sometimes that the banking industry, I hate like hell to be here defending the banking industry and the insurance industry, but they pay for this service. And I think that they require, or they would at least request, that what they're getting is what they're paying for. And I think if you're on the banking side of this, it has to stay as a competitive job. We lost the 5 insurance-sided jobs years and years ago. But the banking positions should remain as competitive positions. They have a singular deputy superintendent banks. If that's now vacated, I don't have any information that that was vacated, but I'll stand corrected. If that is vacated, and that's what they're seeking to use as the mechanism, is that what you're seeking to use as the mechanism to fill that foreign banks job?
No.
No?
So there
Well,
are
I don't understand how to do
Let's
that.
hear.
You asked the question.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm sorry.
There are many deputy superintendents across the agency. That title is across the agency. The highest title under me is executive deputy superintendent, then under that is deputy superintendent. We actually have multiple deputy superintendents in the banking division right now that are exempt positions.
On the rules.
And the banking division actually has 3 subdivisions. Foreign and wholesale banks is one. So yes, we're looking for a deputy superintendent to manage that division within banking. That's all that posting is.
Where you're seeking
The
to
nomenclature, and
Mr.
then we
Santo?
have a community
Mr.
and
Santo?
regional banks
No comments.
division in banking, which also has a deputy superintendent. And we have a licensed financial services division, which also has a deputy superintendent. Same titles over on the insurance. I have deputy and superintendents in compliance, in enforcement, in financial frauds and consumer protection. I mean, that's just a internal general title. And really what we're seeking to do here is, again, it should be financial services because that's the agency. And there should be fluidity and the ability to hire people in financial services, having nothing to do with the responsibility that I have to follow the statute and to have a banking division and insurance division, as well as 5 or 6 other divisions that I have within the agency, and manage that for purposes of the assessments to the industry that I have to do and Chad has to do to ensure that we're assessing appropriately.
But even though the law allows specifically the superintendent to make these necessary changes.
Correct.
So that's in your purview
Yes.
to reassign and to administer whatever the agency will need according to all the other laws, according to civil service law
Correct.
that you have to abide by. But in the statute, it allows the superintendent to make those justifications.
Yes.
Superintendent, how many competitive deputy superintendents do you have right now, either banking or insurance?
We have, I think there's 5 or 6.
And would they remain as such?
Yeah,
Yes.
there's no change of jurisdictional class for
Okay.
anybody. This is a position that exists in the exempt class today. And we
And
just,
We have it in the example.
And I'm just curious, what was the rationale going back? And Mr. Santo, you might have this readily available. What was the rationale going back prior to 2011, prior to the establishment of DFS? Why were there competitive banking superintendents?
Well, I certainly can be backed up by staffing services and class and comp. This is a long, long history that the banking department has a traineeship, which leads to the grade 20 position. This was the culminating position in the bank examination series. The M8 is the highest level of competitive. I mean, it's kind of strange to be talking about a competitive level position at the M8, but it is the culminating position in a whole series that the former banking department prided themselves on, where you went through, they trained their people, the school of hard knocks, competitive class, they took the test, they moved up, they went off the traineeship, they went to the 20, right up to the M8. That's what this was, that's what we're supposed to be talking about here. That's what this was about. And I hear about deputy superintendent positions, I can count, and I don't see where they had, I'm looking right at the rules, and I don't see all of the, unless we got titles here that are being, redone, and I don't see where the Civil Service Commission has ever acted on it. We have deputy superintendent banks, 1 position. We have deputy superintendent, 5 positions. We have a deputy superintendent public information. We have, that's it. We have a first deputy superintendent, 2 of them. We have assistant to the superintendent. Now, these are the specific titles within the rules. If they have some operating titles and they're calling people deputy superintendents, then they should have come here and they should have gotten the permission to have those people operate properly under a terminology that was approved by the Civil Service Commission. I'm hearing that the deputy superintendent for foreign banks is an exempt position already, and they're going to make it they're going to go and fill it. Where? It's an insurance job, is what I'm saying that they're trying to fill.
Mr.
A banking
Santo,
position.
with all due respect, the legislation, and I'm looking at it because you very nicely provided it to us, said the superintendent shall establish an insurance division and a banking division, period. That's all it says. It does not say that the superintendent of the Department of Financial Services does not have the power to allocate her resources where the needs are. It does not require a silo, if you will, whether it's your term or class and comp's term. This is a new entity with a broader mission and scope. At least so far, that is what we have heard. That is what has been presented. And so I'm struggling to understand why there is such resistance to allowing the agency to use a title that gives the superintendent that fluidness that she needs in order to be responsive to a highly fast-paced changing industry that has to be responsive to the regulatory community.
Well, except if you go through into the law a little further, you'll see that except as may be otherwise provided by civil service law. And I think civil service law is quite specific on this. I think civil service law, as manifest in the rules, has spelled out specifically what the positions are. You have the historic 5 positions as deputy superintendent, and you have the 1 position of a deputy superintendent banks, which is an exempt position.
Right, and those spoke to old agencies.
Those speak to the law that has remained unchanged.
Those spoke to old agencies, and in
speaks to-
2011,
that speaks
we
to
had
the-
legislation that created the Department of Financial
I
Services.
think that we have, I think that's just that area that we're going to continuously disagree
No,
on.
and I'm okay with that.
Okay, I'm okay with it too. And
Okay.
but I would strongly suggest that before you act on this, you do get an advisory opinion from the Attorney General, who himself has raised issues with the Department of Financial Services and some of the changes that are being manifest in the budget and the power that is now being sought to be put into the hands of the superintendent, which reflects all the way down through the line as far as where these other appointments are going. There seems to be some concern as to whether non-elected officials can function as, per se, district attorneys. And I think this is part of that discussion. So I would strongly advise not to do anything with this high-level position reporting directly to the superintendent until that's all clarified.
Commissioner, I just want to add one thing before we go on, and just to clarify. The commission did approve the 5 deputy superintendents in the exempt class as that title. The commission did approve that. Currently, there is one vacant deputy superintendent position, which the agency is using to fill that in-house title.
Thank you. I'm never quite sure that, and I've sat on this commission 11 years, and I've never been told that this commission does not have the ability to act on an item before us. So I'd like to hear from council on that.
My impression of Mr. Santo's presentation is that he is correct in as much as the rules reflect the positions outside of the competitive class in DFS as it exists today. DFS has made a request to reclassify an exempt position to another exempt position. And the commission statutorily has the authority to create new positions outside of the competitive class and to reclassify positions outside of the competitive class, provided they are named specifically in the rules. So I think it's sort of what you would be performing essentially as part of your statutory function, which is distinct from, I believe Mr. Santo was making sort of a functional argument that this reorganization reflects an attempt to blur the distinctions between the insurance division and the banking division, and please excuse me if I'm mischaracterizing it.
It's a good characterization.
However, the law speaks only to the fact that these two divisions have to exist within DFS. It does not specify that certain positions must be in the competitive class or other jurisdictional class. And there are some positions I can cite just in civil service. There is a division of classification and compensation that's established statutorily. And there the legislature has chosen to make sure that the director must be in the competitive class. Similarly, the former Office of Real Property Services, the head of that agency had to be competitive. What you have here, there's nothing in the section of law that was provided that says that certain positions must have a certain jurisdictional classification. So absent that legislative direction, the commission retains its full statutory authority to classify positions outside the competitive class.
And Jeff, when you refer to the law that you're referencing in section 205
Yes.
for the financial law, okay, financial
Yeah,
services.
because the legislature in theory could have said when they
They could have
created
given it a
DFS, yes, that
classification.
we require that, a certain deputy superintendents must be competitive, but it's my understanding just from this little snippet that they did not. And
They did not. We have no such requirement, and this just says as you've noted, that we need to have a division for banking and division of insurance. Doesn't say what the employee competitive or not class needs to be, how many people need to be in each division, and it certainly doesn't say that we can't have other divisions, which we already do as well.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
Are there any further comments on this before we take action? Knowing that this has caused a lot of comments. Are you fine with this?
Yes.
So on the request for an additional position of deputy superintendent, which is being reclassified from deputy superintendent banks, which is currently exempt, to the exempt jurisdictional classification, I vote we approve.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Al.
The next request from the Department of Financial Services to add the following positions to the exempt class. Assistant Chief Investigations, 10 positions. Investigator 1, 23 positions. And this is, again, all for the exempt class.
So, last year, there was a whole statewide study that was done on investigators, and there were some title consolidations and reallocations, upwards and downwards. Our investigator title series, or investigative specialist, is kind of unique because it was in the non-competitive class, and there were questions that were raised also as to whether it should stay non-competitive or if it should morph to exempt or should it be competitive. In discussing with the staff at Civil Service in relation to all the things we've talked about so far, and then the next package that we'll discuss as well, we were talking about investigators in the field and investigations, and then that related to the changing financial services industry. what we came up with is that we felt that for us to have the flexibility related to investigators, we wanted to convert all the vacant positions in the current investigative specialist title series that's non-competitive over to the exempt class. So this doesn't impact anybody that's currently non-competitive. It doesn't impact anybody that's in any of the investigative specialist positions. This is just a future action on behalf of the agency, but it also gives us the flexibility, one, for career mobility internally, but also externally to be able to bring in staff that might have the skill sets we don't necessarily have today related to the change in financial services law in our purview. And like I said, the 33 is based upon the fact that we have 33 vacant investigative specialists today. And we decided on 2 different levels to have some kind of delineation and duties between an investigator and then a supervisory investigator.
And that's the assistant chief?
Correct.
And this is again because of the, new obligations and the changing and fast-paced environment to be able to have investigators to address, those issues and the environment that we're in.
And does the same logic that you offered us earlier apply as to why these do not lend themselves to non-competitive classification?
Yes. Yes, I mean, we're dealing with, investigations on money laundering, terrorist financing. We will have cybersecurity investigations. So to be able to have the flexibility to hire people with relevant experience, we don't believe can be examined for. But of course, providing that career mobility within the agency as well as an option.
Can you speak a little bit more, Tad, as to why they could not be non-competitive, why they could not be maintained as that? Because to be non-competitive, you're looking for a very specific skill set that I think lends itself well to non-competitive classification. So I'm not understanding why the flexibility of exempt is quite necessary in these. And I guess I need to understand that better.
Confidential further.
So I think in the investigation field, when you look at some of the other agencies that have exempt investigators, and we actually have exempt investigators today at DFS, it really comes down to the confidentiality involved with the investigations. And so in trying to look at where we wanted to go as an agency related to this occupational area, the non-competitive class, though it defines specific qualifications, really did not lend itself well to the continued morphing of the agency. And then the new obligations the agency has, but then the changing obligations as well. And so when we looked at the classifications of the previous investigators that are exempt at the agency, but also looked at other agencies like the AG's office, I believe the Comptroller's office, we really tried to match up with what has been done before in state service, to not be anything that's precedent setting, but to be something that is in line with the other benchmarks that were created. One specific note I just want to indicate related to this is that though we're talking about the conversion of the 33 non-competitive investigative specialists to exempt, and I think this is a very, very important note to put out there as well, we're not asking for the 33 to go management confidential, we're asking for the 33 to stay PATH.
Comments?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for the requested 10 positions of Assistant Chief of Investigations and 23 positions of Investigator 1 being requested in the exempt class, I vote to approve.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Al.
And the next and final request from the, today from the Department of Financial Services is a request for several positions that fall under the title of Financial Services Specialist 1, 2, and 4 with various parenthetics. And this is, again, for the non-competitive class, and these are non-5 positions.
So in looking at this title and the various parenthetics, what we did is, in partnering with Civil Service, we looked at many of our standalone title series. Right now we have many specialized title series that are non-competitive, from Holocaust claims specialists to urban analysts to fair lending specialists. We have some competitive title series, trust examiners, infotech examiners, and internal audit control specialists. They're currently competitive. And we were looking at specialties in general and looking and saying, we have all these standalone title series, but yet we have common duties, responsibilities, and KSAs across all of them. So in talking with Civil Service and looking at other state agencies, we felt that coming up with a common title of financial services specialist made sense, because this is really the core specialties that we can use in relation to the new regulations and the changing regulations as well. So we wanted to morph on title structure changes, all these existing title series over to this new core title with parenthetics. And then we wanted to add additional parenthetics in relation to virtual currency, financial crime risk, different parenthetics that meet some of the things that we need to do today that we don't necessarily have the capability to do. In relation to the competitive titles, it was brought up, I've heard multiple things about wide sweeping conversion of competitive titles to non-competitive. We're talking about 3 titles today, and I'll go through them specifically here. We have the internal audit control specialist, in which there's currently not a list out there for that, and we're not aware of when the last examination was held related to that. And we're looking to morph that to the parenthetic of internal controls with very specialized qualifications. And in talking with Civil Service, they, and I'll defer to them, I'll let them talk about that here in a sec, if you want to hear from them. Based upon that specialty of internal controls, it was decided that the conception came up that non-competitive seemed to be better than competitive class. On the information technology examiners, that title series, which is currently competitive, we are proposing to morph to a cybersecurity parenthetic. The last time an examination was held for infotech examiners was 2010. The list was extended in 2014. And because of the morphing to cybersecurity and our obligations related to cybersecurity, for example, we just put out new cybersecurity regulations in the agency, but we don't necessarily have the staff on hand or the ability to move staff internally into titles to deal with cybersecurity. We felt that morphing of that title series made sense. And in talking about the specific qualifications related to cybersecurity, and then partnering with Civil Service, trying to examine for that and to be up to speed on the change in cybersecurity regulations just didn't make sense. And that's why we were proposing morphing that to non-competitive as well. And the other one was the trust examiners. The last time an exam was held for trust examiners, I believe, was in 2013, but that field is changing as well in relation to the financial services industry, and we felt that putting that into the non-competitive class with specific quals was appropriate also in discussing with Civil Service. So all the different parenthetics that we're proposing really are related to where the agency has come since 2011, the new regulations, the new statutory obligations we have, the regulations and the statutory obligations that we're not necessarily doing today, but also the anticipated and unanticipated initiatives coming up. And it'll give us some flexibility to not only deal with those, but also it's going to give us flexibility when it comes to mobility of staff in the agency and the staff in the banking and the insurance divisions to be able to better utilize our staff and to give them opportunities they don't necessarily have today. And I believe this ties in with some the superintendent indicated is that we have made a very concentrated effort on our training program in the agency and expanding our training program. When the superintendent came in, we had 3 staff in training. We have upwards of 8 to 9 staff in training today. We're looking to add a couple more staff. And that with any of these specialties, whether it's virtual currency, cybersecurity, financial crime risk, there's going to be a very specific program related to training our staff to then give them these opportunities forward into these new titles.
Thank you. So this total recommendation, if I'm understanding the numbers correct, I certainly would not have been a good actuary. My math is not good. 165, is that correct, in total?
That would be correct.
Okay.
And it's the same concept associated with the program directors.
Right.
So we can assess what we really need in these areas to be able to handle the new regulations that we're in front of.
And to unify the title series, the financial services specialist.
Because they do exist in other agencies.
Right.
Knowing that this
The
is the
specialist.
last item before us from DFS, and knowing that this was all the culmination of working with staff from the department on the title consolidation and
Right.
modernization, is this it? Or are there others that you are also anticipating to be coming before the commission?
I think this
This
is
is
it
it.
before the commission.
We don't have any others anticipated. I don't want to foreclose us coming up with something in the future, but
No,
we're
no,
not
no, not that
hiding
you
anything.
would. I'm just trying
We
to
don't have,
understand.
this is, we put it all together.
All right. Do you have any questions on this one? No, I do not either.
Commissioners, just to clarify also, they're asking for unlimited numbers
Right.
for the financial services specialist 1 and 2. They have limited numbers on the financial services specialist 4.
Right.
Right.
No financial service specialist 3 on this, huh?
Well, what it is that some of the titles, like Holocaust claims
There-
specialist, there will be a 3 level, and that's at the grade 25 level, but we weren't asking for the classification of grade 25s unless it was appropriate, and that would be a different process that we'd have to work with
Okay.
with civil service on.
Understood.
These are traditional 18, 23, 27 titles.
Okay. So on the matter, I'm sorry.
I believe.
Oh, yes, Mr. Jones, go ahead, please.
Don't you have a request in for 5 additional positions to cover in fellows into positions?
That's not on the calendar today.
That's not before us today.
I understand that, but you asked them if they,
I just asked if they had other title modernization efforts in the works.
Not to come to the civil service.
Not to
Okay.
come to the commission.
The question related to the fellows was that we have 5 fellows who are in the second year of their fellowship, and their fellowship ends in August, and they currently work at the agency, and we would like to keep the fellows, and we need to find ways in order to slide them over into the agency, because in August, I believe, we have to give the lines back to the fellow program.
Okay,
But that's not before the commission today.
Commissioner,
yes.
the primary argument with regard to the positions that are competitive right now seems to be that civil service isn't testing often enough. That's not a criteria to take something from the competitive class and make it non-competitive.
I didn't hear testing often enough. I heard that the environment in which it operates is fast-paced and evolving constantly, and so it is unable to keep pace with the rapidly changing skill set required.
I heard that as well, Commissioner, and I've worked at the Department of Labor. There's a lot of changes that happen in every agency, and yes, the new Bitcoin is a new issue, and there some issues do come up, but not every issue is fast changing as they would have us believe. In the Department of Labor and many agencies, the info security people are rank and file. They're tested for. There's a number of positions here that are we have 3 title series here that they're looking to take from competitive to non-competitive. We've heard statements about rapidly changing, but I mean, I haven't seen any proof of rapidly changing. Everything isn't rapidly changing.
Well, I feel compelled that I feel like the agency certainly has given us ample justification today to support their request. So I haven't heard anything contrary to that either. So I am fully prepared to make a determination on this.
And we didn't receive any information contrary. So what you stated, I didn't see any. Did you submit any additional information to
Of how it's not evolving?
We were hoping to get more information here today, so we could submit more information to you. We really didn't expect to be making decisions here today, and very frankly, this thing has moved along very quickly. And
It's been on notice. I mean, this has been.
There is a
made-
comment period, Mr. Jones, just so you are
I
aware.
understand that. We do intend to submit comments. but-
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Santo.
It was just one disturbing thing I just keep hearing over and over, and it's not aimed at the Department of Financial Services or staffing or class and comp, but it's a very concerning statement, which is that the examination process has become too static. I hear nothing about what the agency is doing or I see no request from the agency as far as the budgetary process to make the process alive, to put life back into the examination process. I just think it's a terrible excuse, and I understand what the agency is saying and why they're going there. I don't agree with it, but I think at the same time, as the commissioners, somebody has to take the lead somewhere to say that this examination process has to get re-enlivened. It needs a breath of fresh air. I mean, when I was at Civil Service, we did an awful lot with training and experience examinations because you couldn't do a pencil paper test for a specific job. But we did come up with a prototype to do training and experience. They don't have the staff. I know they don't have the staff. I'd fight every day to go and make sure that they have the staff to be able to do that. But I think there has to be a concerted effort. And I ask the commissioners to take that lead, to go and demand of the governor to staff this agency so that they can once again begin to go and take that terminology that, the examination process is too static. We're rolling out the professional careers exam. That's fine as far as people coming in. Maybe the professional's career exam can be adapted or adopted in some way to help with some of these other titles as well. Maybe oral exam process. My God, when the hell have we ever had an oral exam again? I mean, I think there's a lot of tools, testing tools that are part of the examination process that have been kind of put on the shelf. We have to re-enliven. We have to go and give some rebirth to the exam, or we're going to be here more often, because it just seems as if that because of the lack of funding and the lack of the ability of the civil service to do their job, we have had to go this route of saying things are non-competitive or even to the point of exempt. And I don't think that that's a good excuse. I think I'll fight with my last breath to make sure that the Civil Service Department, as I have, that they keep getting the funding necessary to go and provide the agencies with the expertise to keep the merit system alive. Thank you.
I appreciate your comments, Mr.
Thank you.
Santo. They are noted in the record, and I would just offer this, that our department has been and continues to look at testing modernization.
Mm-hmm.
And I
We've been part of
stand
that.
by the staff of this department that they are of the utmost skill and caliber, and certainly are doing everything in their efforts. But in response to what you are saying, there will be, and there have been, and there will always be instances where competitive examination may not be practicable. And that is what is outlined in the law. And there are instances where there is a skill set that will constantly be evolving and responsive to the times that we are all faced with. And so I certainly think for the item that is before us today, I think the Department of Financial Services did an outstanding job outlining why their argument for non-competitive class is such. And I have not heard anything contrary to that for this request before us, so I am quite comfortable with moving forward.
And just to also comment on class and comp and staffing, has worked with all the parties in coming to a conclusion that this is practicable.
And they are
So-
our subject matter experts on this, and we rely heavily on their advice and their recommendation. So to that end, just so you are aware, Mr. Jones, there is obviously a comment period, so that is something that you are entitled to take full advantage of.
We intend to. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
So on that, we have to vote on this. So on the matter of the attached chart that we all got for the positions in this title series for financial service specialists 1, 2, and 4 in the non-competitive class with a non-FI jurisdiction, I vote we approve.
I approve as well.
Commissioners, the second part of this, they're asking on the 1 and 2
Unlimited.
for unlimited numbers.
Yes, I am fine with that.
Yes.
Knowing
I
that
approve.
what you have said, Kelly, prior to, is that they would always have to come to you with a package So there is that balance that we would hope that there would be.
Absolutely.
And I believe they asked for certain specific limiting numbers
On the four.
On the four.
On the fours and certain parentheticals.
Okay.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Thank you. And could I just publicly thank the staff?
Absolutely.
Because we have worked, very well with the civil service staff. We came to them with our proposals. It was an iterative process, and they were really terrific, and it really got us to this point. So thank you, and I thank them and my great staff as well as DFS for everything. So thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent.
Thank you.
With that, I propose we adjourn for 5 minutes, just in case, before we move on with the rest of the calendar, if that's okay.
Same here.
Welcome back. The Commission will now act on items related to the Municipal Civil Service Administration for which the Commission has oversight responsibility, including the review and approval of rules adopted by the local civil service commissions and personnel officers. That will be introduced by Frank Bellevue.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
The first item under tab A is a request from the Wyoming County Civil Service Commission. Just as a way of background, at last month's meeting, the Commission calendared this request to place the title OBGYN Physician Provider in the non-competitive class. The action was taken to provide Wyoming County time to submit additional documentation to support recruitment difficulty for the position. Wyoming County did provide detailed recruitment information. Recruitment efforts included the posting of the position on the physician recruitment page of the Wyoming County Community Health System website and participation in 2 job fairs through Career MD. The latter was held in New York City. The county has also contracted out with a number of firms specializing in recruitment assistance. Wyoming County advised that the only applicant was a resident of New York City, and that person was selected. The lack of a mandatory field of candidate support